people that host us. She's also, if she's not busy enough, the founder of an amazing organization. And the Flourish organization enables her to connect with all of these individuals, but also to help train the settler organization and provide us learning opportunities to figure out how can we decolonize not only our own ways of knowing and doing, but how can we help and be good allies in dismantling systems. She teaches feminist and decolonizing methodologies in her research, and these post-colonial models of diversity and inclusion are so needed because my own research demonstrates currently in Canada, there's nothing post about colonialism. So it is with a great honor that we have these three knowledge givers with us. And I won't take much more of our time before we get to hear from them and then get to your questions. But like Dr. Jenkins, I just want to remind us that we have some protocols when we're sharing and giving knowledge. And so I'd like us all to ground ourselves and be aware, as he said, of our immediate space. And today, I ask you to be uncomfortable. And in that uncomfortableness, I ask you to reflect. Why am I investing my time, my treasure, and my talents in this? I want you to disconnect if possible, from your phone and from everything else that distracts us on our desk. And I want you to connect to what these powerful matriarchs are going to share with us today and the uncomfortable conversations that we're going to have. Because we need to build the awareness also, as we got taught today, that Zoom is technology. So if any of you disappear, please come back. Or if any technology issues happen, continue to be patient with us and be that patient. And finally, and lastly, if at all possible, because it is such good medicine, have some levity, because we're going to get uncomfortable, and laughter is medicine, and there will be spaces and places for levity. So without further ado, I'd like to first, before we get into each of their stories, have Linda Jean unmute and set the context for us by providing us with the definitions that will ground us in the conversations that we're going to have today. Over to you, Linda Jean.
Well, thank you very much, Shirley Pat. I really appreciate you being here and in doing those introductions. And good morning to each of you who are in the morning. And I don't know if anyone is in another time zone, but I'm in the very early morning here on the West Coast. Hopefully we'll really be able to engage in conversation. And since we have in fact lost quite a bit of time, I mean, really when it comes to these kinds of things, I'm going to shorten, I'm going to edit things, and if it seems disjointed, we'll pull it back together. Keep in mind, we're not going to solve this problem. This workshop is racism, a learned reality. And I really believe that we learned racism. We are not born. I don't think anyone is born a racist. There are no racist genes that exist, okay? Now for yourself, remember to put in your questions and your comments into the chat box. And I know that Shirley Pat will be monitoring that and making sure, to the best of our ability, we will be able to address all of that. Now, how do we learn racism? We learn racism from the time we're born. We learn racism in our families because, of course, they've passed on what they've learned, which they've inherited from, from their ancestors as well. We learned it in our churches. The religions have a lot of doctrines that today we could label as racist. Our schools, our education system is fraught with misinformation, even to this day. Misinformation, the total omission of critical information, as well as the passing on of expectations, which we, as an adult, and able to think for ourselves, as opposed to a child who is basically a big sponge for what's given to us. We have some choices now. We really, really do. Whether we take them or not, well, that's going to be up to us. Now that we have social media, racism is being able to be shared all around the world to all ages, at all times, 24 hours a day. We do know that if we look at what's considered to be great literature, what our movies have been, and things that we have been exposed to that we don't even think about, but we are influenced by. Now, in information about diverse groups, as I mentioned before, is often ignored totally. There's the whole denial of existence. I remember when I was chosen to be the visible minority representative for BC on the Labor Force Development Board, and then sat on the Canadian Labor Force Development Board. And the whole concept that one person can represent every quote unquote minority group. And let's not forget that when we talk about minorities, collectively, it's a vast majority in the entire world. The other thing, and I definitely learned this through the workshops that I had delivered, is that being called a visible minority is very interesting when you can be totally invisible. I'll just tell you a little quick story, because I had a situation where I was doing a workshop. Everyone in the workshop were Caucasian in management, etc. And we were talking about the necessity to understand these kinds of issues. And one of the participants says, well, I don't have any diversity in my neighborhood. And in the schools. So I asked where she lived. She lived in Ocean Park in the White Rock area. I lived there. My children went to the same school that her children went to, but there was no diversity in her entire community. So she didn't need to worry about this kind of stuff. But let me get on, because I have to be careful. That's why I got Shirley Pat to keep me from carrying on too long, because there's a lot to be said. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to do is to help us recognize that there's some particular terms that are often used and associated with racism. Prejudice, which is basically prejudging people, and generally based on negative and incorrect information. Stereotypes, which is a real problem because stereotypes are true for some people. The problem is it's a stereotype because it's applied to everyone in that particular category. There's the bias, which is the preconceived and limited view for or against individuals or groups. And we don't even apologize for it. We just have it. We know it's right because it's ours. Discrimination, the practice or act of making distinctions between people based on identifiable characteristics, which leads to inequitable treatment. And then, of course, the systemic discrimination, which has gotten a lot of press lately, which is differential treatment through seemingly neutral policies or practices that result in inequitable treatment of members of a particular group. But we think it's okay because everybody has to meet those criteria without even thinking that it in fact has a negative impact on certain groups. And racism, and this is a definition that was developed primarily through the various workshops that I have done on unlearning racism. Racism are assumptions, I'm going to read it, assumptions and actions resulting from the mistaken belief that one group is inherently superior to another group. Racism refers not only to social attitudes toward ethnocultural groups, but also to social structures and actions that limit, exclude, discriminates against, and oppresses individuals or groups. Racism exists in organizations, institutional structures, and programs, as well as in the attitudes and behaviors of individuals. And unfortunately, people often think when you think racism, you think of a person is racist. But in fact, we have entire organizations, as I've said, that in fact are racist in their delivery of services, if they deliver services at all. Racism continues in part because we often feel powerless to do anything about it. If we accept the premise that racism is learned, we need to ask ourselves, what actions will I take to work toward eliminating racism? I thought I should have gave you the timer.
I did. I gave you the heart. I gave you the heart because I don't have the sunglasses. They don't give me all the emojis. We were trying to get a signal behind the scenes that you guys wouldn't notice, but they took away my emojis. So if you see me giving a heart, it is love, but it's also an indication for you to think about your time, ladies. I appreciate Linda Jean setting
Thank you very much.
Thank you for those definitions that you provided us to do so. Prabhjot, if you could unmute and share with us what you would like to share today, that would be lovely.
Thank you. Aiswell, everyone. Aiswell is a Halkamelam word for greetings. So much like our broad generic hello. So Aiswell to all of you. I'm joining today from the land of the Sumas nation of Stalo nation. Stalo people are the people of the river. This area is known by its colonial name, Abbotsford. Otherwise, if you were to look on a map, but there are maps that have been created with First Nations places, Aboriginal maps in Canada. Please find some moments to learn about those if you can. I raise my hands in gratitude to the knowledge keepers and to the elders, Indigenous colleagues, Indigenous students and community members from whom I have learned, I am learning, and I will continue to learn. I represent here today West Coast Coalition Against Racism. And in the interest of time, I was actually going to do share screen. I'll just speak here, and I do hope that I'm clear to everyone. Feel free to ask me a question subsequently. West Coast Coalition Against Racism, or WCCARS, we all got together in 2020 with the rise in the number of incidents. It isn't that racism had gone down at all, but it suddenly increased exponentially. And the geography where we are located in the Metro Vancouver area, there were several incidents against people from Asia, Northeast, South Asia, and of course, continuum of racism in which I'm not going, and I'm sure all of you are attentive to such details. So we got together to press on the need to raise our voices against racism. There is a bit of history. There was BC organization to fight racism, BCOFR, that had come together in the late 70s and in the 80s in BC and had considerable success in uniting diverse communities in their common struggle. And keeping that in mind, Chin Banerjee, who passed away in the summer of 2020, this is one of his last actions. He got all different organizations and individuals together to form this coalition. And we've been working tirelessly since then. It's a volunteer organization. So we have people putting in a lot of energy, some energy whenever they can come and go. And that is a very important point related to voluntary organizations. So I raise my hands to all those who contribute. So what do we do? Who we are, etc., etc. Very briefly, we are a coalition of organizations and individuals committed to positive change in the struggle against racism. So what do? We challenge racism through positive action as in advocacy and education. So how do we carry out advocacy? I'll just share some examples with you, because we felt that just by gathering, one is that self-reflexivity, and that we meet and we learn and increase our awareness as individuals and then as a collective. But then what do we do with that? Is that sufficient? No. So how do we go to community? So one of the things that we started to do was that when we came to know of certain racist incidents, some of the people tried to reach out to the person or the organization. So it could be individuals, say in Abbotsford, or it could be a mosque in Langley, and so on and so forth. So our members, either they personally went there even during pandemic, or wrote letters or issued statements. Now, through statements such as writing to the school district in Abbotsford, when a school teacher, and I'll just share that with you briefly, that a school teacher for 5th grader gave homework asking the students to write 5 positive stories or facts about residential schools. And those of you who are quite familiar with the history of residential schools, so I beforehand acknowledge the trauma that people have suffered and continue to suffer. So in this context, then, the letter issued to the school also was a learning experience for many of us who are educators, that how at times there can be a moment work without too much of thinking and tries to find positive experience in a negative experience. We all have gone through, isn't it, that we try to find good, just like the technical difficulties, I was just trying to look at the positive side of it, but there is a limit to that. So then that is an education moment for us as individuals. But then we wrote a strong letter to the school district, or we wrote a strong letter to the Hilton Hotel, which has been discriminating against women of color who were laid off during the pandemic and never given back their jobs and the benefits that were there. Or recently, a couple of weeks ago, Komagata Maru Memorial on the seawall in Vancouver was damaged yet again. It was a deliberate damage, and there have been several incidents, including somebody urinating at the photograph of all those men standing on board the ship in 1914. So these kinds of incidents come, and we try and reach out to people. We issue statements, we gather as groups. There are some elders in our groups. Elders, I mean, they are seniors in activism, and so they talk about, we need to have flying squads. We need to have flying squads so that we can go and provide support to people, because merely gathering, I'm not saying that today we are gathering and not learning. We are learning, but only meeting via Zoom or in a room and talking about things is not going to yield results many times. So we need to be there shoulder to shoulder with people and demonstrate our solidarity to them. In the interest of time, I know I had set aside about 8 minutes or so. I'll just stay quiet now because we'll get an opportunity, considering we lost a few minutes earlier on. So I conclude by thanking all my teachers, and that would include Linda Jean also, with whom I worked in the 1990s when I had moved from India. So I want to thank my teachers. There are so many, all of them, wherever they may be. So, and I thank each one of you for your attention.
Oh, Prabjo, Sachana Yagulin, in the words of the Chilcotin people, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your sharing. I'm going to ask now that Dr. Andrea unmute and share a little bit about her journey and lived experience with us now.
Sure. I think I'm going to just focus a little bit on one topic also in the interest of time, but I too give thanks. I come to you today from the Semiahmoo First Nation ancestral and current territories on which I have my home. I live and work and love and laugh on these lands. The Semiahmoo First Nation has the horrific reputation of being the only First Nations community in Metro Vancouver that does not have access to clean water, nor a sufficient sewage system. Important information. When I considered if I have 8 or 10 minutes, what is important to me about anti-racism, I knew I wanted to talk about allyship. And so I am going to take my time here with your permission. I'll just begin with a quote from Dr. Suad Abdu Kabir. She says, you don't need to be a voice for the voiceless. You just need to pass the mic. And another quote from Leila Abdullah Poulos, who says, effective allies can't just speak about erasure. They are supposed to create spaces to pass the mic, to center marginalized voices. And I did have a picture I wanted to put up. I'll see if this will work for us. Thank you so much.
There we go.
Maybe not. What are you looking at there?
Oh, because I have it.
Have you? Are you looking at it? There it is. Are you looking at a tree? I hope you're.
Yes, yes.
Oh, thank you if you did that, Shirley Pat. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, did you get it
No,
up,
that was
Shirley?
Linda Jean. That was Linda
Oh,
Jean.
Linda
or it
Jean
might
did
have
it.
been
Brilliant. Thank
Oh,
you
Linda
to
Jean
whoever
did it.
did. Thank you so much.
Can you see it?
Everybody can see it. All right. These lands that we now call Canada, and certainly, you know, south of us, this entire Turtle Island, these lands are seeped in colonialism. It is literally the water in which we swim, and it has been the air in which we breathe. And affirmative action has generally not created sustainable change, because it is just like grafting a new limb onto a poisoned tree. Grafting simply doesn't work. This is root work. This is root canals and extractions. It requires a change of consciousness. It requires a change of heart. And those of us who've been granted privileges based purely on who we are born, whether white, male, straight, cisgendered, and so on, may experience wanting to give back those privileges, which is obviously not possible. Or we may choose to use them to improve the experience of those who do not have the same access to power or resources. One of the most effective ways to use privilege is to learn to become an effective ally of those on the other side of the privilege binary. This type of alliance requires continual self-reflection, the willingness to go against the people who share our privileged status and with whom we are always expected to group ourselves. Allies work continuously to develop an understanding of the personal and institutional experiences of the person or people with whom they are aligning themselves. If the ally is a member of a privileged group, it is essential that she or he also strives for clarity about the impact of privilege on her or his life. What this might look like. Consistently asking myself what it means to be white in this situation. How does white show up? How would I be experienced now if I were of color? How would my life in this organization, for instance, be different if I were not white or male or heterosexual or tenured or upper management? Closely observing the experiences of people of color in the organization, how they are listened to, talked to, promoted, or expected to do additional jobs. Few of us who are white ever have to be professional whites, asked to speak for our ethnicity or represent our ethnicity, or offer support to people purely because their skin color is the same as ours. To be an ally is to take on the struggle as your own. Roxane Gay was infamous for those words. To transfer the benefits of your privilege to those without or who are lacking. Amplified voices of the oppressed before your own. To not rescue or fall into misguided white savior complex. To acknowledge that even though you're feeling pain, this conversation is not about you. To stand up and speak up even when you feel scared. To own your mistakes and to decenter yourself. And to understand that your education is up to you and to no one else. We may need to give up the benefits we received from this biased system in the first place. It may also mean assessing who is at least risk to step into a situation and initiate change, always conferring first with others who are at a greater risk about the best strategies and moving forward. It may mean understanding that this is not another opportunity to take charge, to ride in on white horses, or to fix anything. Ally relationships are that, relationships. Together with the people who are not privileged, we choreograph who makes which moves and when they will be made. On many occasions, people of color may look to white allies to educate other white people. It is not the job of BIPOC to educate white people. And because of my privilege, I am less likely to suffer from speaking straightforwardly than they might. If we're to be genuine allies to BIPOC, we must constantly observe the subtleties and nuances of other white people's comments and behaviors, just as we observe our own. And we must take the risk of asking, what if I'm wrong about how I think BIPOC are being treated in my institution or place of worship or community? What can I do to seek out the reality of their experiences? How will I feel if I discover that people I know, love, and trust are among the worst offenders? And what will I do? Some of the do's of being an ally: do be open to listening. Do be aware of your implicit biases. Do your research to learn more about the history of the struggle in which you are participating. Do the inner work to figure out a way to acknowledge how you participate or are complicit in oppressive systems. Do the outer work and figure out how to change those oppressive systems. Do use your privilege to amplify, digitally and in person, historically suppressed voices. Do learn how to listen and accept criticism with grace, even when it's uncomfortable. Do the work every day to learn how to be a better ally. And of course, some of the don'ts. Do not expect to be taught or shown. Take it upon yourself to use the tools around you to learn and answer your questions. Do not participate for the gold medal in the Oppression Olympics. You don't need to compare how your personal struggle might be just as bad. Do not behave as though you know what is best. Do not take credit for the labor of those who did the work before you ever stepped into the picture. And do not assume that every member of an underinvested community feels oppressed. So how do we make systemic change? We can boycott massively complicit companies and institutions. We have a lot of power as consumers in the market. We can commit to researching companies before purchasing or investing. Researching institutions before we're attending. We can establish a strategy for when we learn new information about a company we were supporting, remembering this isn't about perfection. We're all stuck living under capitalism for right now, but doing the most and best that we can long term. We can evaluate what is our long-term commitment to this work. We can work on building vocabulary to address racism. We can invite others into anti-racism conversations, especially the ones who look like us. When it comes to employment, conferences, clubs, sport teams, school, worship spaces, basically every avenue of our lives, our participation is a passive stamp of our approval. Before saying yes, we can ask for clarifying information and make informed decisions. Before I close, I would just like to offer some questions for consideration. And Sherry Pat, I just wanted to say, before I ever begin in teaching, I always say, now let's get uncomfortable. So I appreciated you saying that. Question number one, marginalized communities do not need allies. They do need people who stand up and take the problems born of oppression as their own, without remove or distance. What does that mean to you? How do you interpret this statement as you consider how to be an effective ally? Secondly, trying to take on systemic change can often feel like a tsunami. What micro changes will you be responsible for and accountable for, beginning today and continuing every day hereafter? And my last question is, we recognize that anti-racism is an individual process that begins with historical awareness, with personal awareness and ownership, and then a change of heart or metanoia. How do you relate to this model? And how does this differ for you from cognitive learning? Thank you so much for listening.
Andrew. Thank you very much. Linda Jean, over to you to provide us with the bookend before our discussion.
Okay, what I need to know is my screen still being shared, or?
It is. So if you stop share, then the tree is lovely, but if you stop share, then we can see everybody a little bit more and you can share the things.
To stop share.
Just at the bottom, if you If you
Here's-
look at the top, it should say stop share on view options. And maybe we could ask the tech
I
to
don't
do
see it.
that.
It says pause share.
Okay, pause share for now. See if
Okay, so
does
that
it.
works.
Nope, we still
Pause
see
share
it.
works.
So why don't you start and I'll work on the behind the screen with tech number 8 and see if we can get that off the screen for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I am so impressed with the people here and what we have in fact shared. And but something came into the chat box. I think it was, who was it? Carl, who on race, who studied about the bio.
I'm on now, I guess.
Are you on there? Oh, there you
Can you
are,
hear me?
Carl. Yes. Carl, that's one of the things that I often, when I actually do the workshops, I talk about, but I didn't have the time here today. But I would really appreciate it if you would share that whole issue, because race is a social construct. It is not a DNA biological reality. So could you please share some of that with us, please? I appreciate it.
Well, Jane, I I agree with you and I disagree with you.
Great, even better.
Yeah, I think there was a fear when we first did DNA analysis that we would find some major racial issues, but it's been the exact opposite. And the theory is, you might have seen years ago, or in the 90s, they had Time magazine had mitochondrial Eve on it. And what that came from was that our DNA among all different, what we call races, which I disagree with, but are incredibly similar. And the theory is that we went through two bottlenecks, maybe 200,000 years ago and 70,000 years ago, and we almost were wiped out. Sort of like we had a disease and it killed everyone but Irish redheads. So then all of humanity would have come from that group of Irish redheads and evolved. So that's one of the things I think it's important to keep in mind, is that we are uniquely uniform compared to some of our closest relatives in the animal kingdom. But I also know that a little bird doesn't go to nest building school. And there are all sorts of other behaviors throughout the animal kingdom where somehow something that's a behavior is actually transmitted through the DNA. And go to birds again. Little male birds have a song of their species. It's not very good. They listen to other birds in their group and their song improves. So, but I think that one can overcome it. So in no way do I want to say that racism, even if there is a genetic component, is a fait accompli. That you might have a tendency, but you say, I shouldn't do this. Like I think when I was growing up, eventually I was attracted to young women, but I knew for my society there were things I shouldn't do because of that attraction. So I think, when we were evolving, when we were hunter-gatherers, men and women had two different jobs. And it was very important in that society. It doesn't apply today. But I think we still have misogynist biases because of our ancient history. And I think also a fear of someone who looks different was a selective advantage when you were hunter-gatherer, because if another tribe comes in, they look different, they speak different. You may live in this valley that can support 100 people. It can't support 200. So I think, but we live in a totally different world. So what I'm suggesting is that we're all 50,000 years old. We're all hunter-gatherers genetically. And we live in a totally different society. So there are some things that we have to overcome. And I think that the things that you're proposing to help, not only with learned discrimination and misogyny, but also with any tendencies we might have, we sort of have to go to school to become modern humans and not hunter-gatherers.
Mhm. Thank you. I'm not muted, am I?
No, you're good. You're good,
Oh,
Linda
okay,
Jean. I'll get Carl
okay.
to mute if I could. And if you
Right.
click on the green button on the bottom of your screen that says share screen, it should turn off for us.
I don't have a green button on the bottom of my screen that says share.
Do you have it on? Is it on the top? You may
On
have
the
moved
top,
your.
I have
you
new
moved
share
the thing.
and resume share. Remember, that's what I mentioned before? I don't,
Okay. All right. Well,
I
I don't
don't
know
have
what's
a-
going on. We're gonna just slide it over there. So if
Or
everybody
screen
just
sharing.
slide over the apple tree, then we'll get Linda Jean to keep going. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it. And when you have
I
a
really
moment,
don't know. Me and my computer are not getting along this morning at all.
that's okay. The
So-
tech and I are behind the scenes. We're still working on it. So you just keep going. And if anybody
Okay,
doesn't want to see the apple tree, you can slide over. Oh,
it came up.
look at it go.
It was a red button. And I was
Colors,
focused on
colors.
green. Sorry about that, everybody. Thank you very much for that, Carl. I think that was a perspective that it's important for people to realize, because there are people who are absolutely committed to their racist beliefs because they absolutely believe that there is a superior quote unquote race and there are inferior races. And what gets me is when they quote scripture to support that. But anyway, that's a whole different thing.
Well, even the Bible says that we're very new because there was some bishop that said we were formed 6,000 years ago. Now, genetics will push it back to at least 70,000 years ago.
Mhm.
But there is, the main thing is that we have to overcome any tendencies we might have.
Mhm, yes. And then, of course, we have to trust that the translators have in fact translated it as it was. But anyway,
Yeah, right.
however, if we can accept my reality, which is racism is learned as thinking and intelligent human beings, it becomes obvious that we can unlearn. We have no choice in what happened in the past. We cannot undo the past. We
Linda Jean,
cannot.
can I make,
Go ahead,
I'd like
please.
to make maybe 2 more comments,
Sure.
if I could. We have over 20,000 genes, things that affect skin color, maybe facial configuration, hair, could be a couple hundred. So those differences are very small compared to our entire gene pool.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that we're getting really mixed. There was a Harvard professor that was arrested in Cambridge breaking into his own home, and because he was Black, and they thought that.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but he then got into the genetics of it and did 23andMe or some of them and found out he is actually more Caucasian than he is African. But he has a darker skin and has some of the characteristics. So not only are we very uniform, but we're becoming more uniform.
Mhm.
But thank you.
So if we want to overcome or start addressing the real problem, which in fact is some of the preconceived notions people have, what do we do? What do we do on an individual basis, as Andrea was pointing out? And how do we begin? One of the things I thought I would share is the fact that I have done dozens and dozens of unlearning racism workshops with organizations, with businesses, with schools. I've had, I spent a lot of time doing it, and I can tell you it works. It does work to get people engaged in the conversation, to have people of all ages start to reflect on the beliefs that they have and make a commitment on a personal level without shaming, without being ashamed or feeling guilty for unfounded beliefs that they previously held prior to hearing something different. And it's not helpful to start blaming others who in fact have come from the same backgrounds that we have. Most of us, and I would say most of us, I will even be even bolder than that. Someone asked when I was in a workshop, how do I know if I'm a racist? Anyone want to guess what my answer was?
Because you're human?
You were born.
Yeah.
You were born and you can't help it. We cannot undo what we have already taken in. However, we can relearn. We can learn new things. We can examine, we can reflect, we can get engaged in conversations. Now, I want to, before we move in anymore, I just want to make one more thing, and that is, how do we, as ICBC, one of my contractors said, combat racism? And I didn't like that terminology. So even though they had hired me to put together some combating racism workshops for their managerial staff, it was changed. I changed it and I convinced them. So the other 2 years that I worked with them, it was on unlearning racism. And it was absolutely fascinating, the kinds of questions, the kinds of curiosity people had when we started talking about the kind of issues that we're talking about here. I won't go into that, but if anyone is interested, I can at some point share information about, because I had a 3-hour workshop, which is what I usually did with the schools, because I worked for the BCTF as well and with school districts. I had a 1-day workshop because there were organizations that didn't want that. And with ICBC, I had responding to racist incidents, because they had quite a bit of that with their staff and with the public. And then the full one was a full 3-day workshop where it was on unlearning racism and what you need to really look at addressing when you're looking at unlearning racism. It's one thing for us to say, you have to reflect and rethink, but where do you go and have those kinds of serious conversations that have some validity and feel safe? Let's just say if you're witnessing a racist incident, one of the things in our society, and it's getting worse because we've had so many physical attacks that were racially motivated lately, and I'm talking about lately, how do you do that in a safe way? And we dealt with that through scenarios. And then we explored what are the different ways that people can do. One of the things I'm just going to share, and then I'm going to shut up, because one of my problems is I can just talk about this stuff forever, is stand with. If you hear someone or see someone verbally abusing someone, to just go over there and stand with the person who has been targeted. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. That alone provides a lot of support. And I found myself actually, and have found myself doing that, not so much lately because I don't hardly go out, but anyway, quite often. And what a difference it makes. I'm going to now turn it to you. What kind of questions do you have? What kind of suggestions do you have that we can share and take away so that we are better equipped to deal with the reality of the racist world that we live in?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Linda Jean. And as people are thinking of their questions to either put into the chat, or because we're a small group, if you're able to use the reaction button to raise your hand, so I can make sure that I get you in an order if you'd like to ask it yourself. If we were in a larger group, I'd stick straight to the chat, but because we're in a little bit of smaller group, that's okay. And while we're waiting for someone, if they have a question, Prabjot, you had a little comment that you would like to make about unlearning racism. If you just like to
Thank you so
unmute.
much, Shelley Pat. Yeah, because I truncated my my very brief presentation, so I just wanted to go into the whole notion of unlearning racism, because those of us who are here, I think we are already in the group who want to talk about it. So, but largely speaking, at times it can become a challenge for people to talk about race. So I always feel I've been deeply committed to the notion of talking race and talking racism. It's a very isolating experience at times. You may be the only person who is talking about it, and there is onslaught of various kinds of disagreements, which are more than welcome. You need to be on solid ground and be comfortable in your skin to talk about it. I think that is a very important part, in addition to open-minded and so on and so forth. And I experienced that as a community member as well as an educator. And I see students in my class some are very openly racist. They will say things and which I'm not going to go into. But what I mean is that one really, and I don't have thick skin like a buffalo as much as I would desire to, but then how do I continue to speak and talk without losing my cool? So, and that's a very important thing. In a private space, it's a different thing, but in a classroom or in a gathering, it's different. So the choice of words accordingly informs. When I'm in private space, there is no censorship. And I love that. I love my private space. There's no censorship. But when I'm in public space, there is some censorship of certain words that our languages afford us so that we can de-stress. And those are very important words. Some of us resort to those. So in unlearning racism, I feel that our choice of vocabulary is very important. And then I have just quickly wanted to share about the education part of it, that how we are learning as community members. We've had at WC Cars just this past early in the month, we had invited Robin Maynard to deliver the first Chin Banerjee Memorial Anti-Racism Lecture. And so there was about 130 or so people there in person who attended. So much will have been gained, just by listening and absorbing. Similarly, we had a symposium for 3 days, Roots, Rhythms, Resistance, which covered multiple facets. If you just go to our website, because people like me or another volunteer, we try to maintain website. We are not website builders, but we manage somehow or the other. So sometimes we lag behind. So you go and have a look at that how different topics are covered. And that is what is important, that we go and participate, contribute. I'm not trying to preach to you at all, just reinforcing some of the things. And Carl, thank you so much for what you have shared. Science affords us so many. I mostly resort to science. I take students back to 18th century and then bring them to now, and then what science has done, and then what role religion plays. I come from India, where discrimination has been on the basis of caste. So it's interesting how science allows us to talk about the commonality and so on. Thank you so much, all of you.
Oh, Prabhjot, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing those pieces. And I encourage all of you in the chat, you'll see both of the addresses for the organization that Dr. Andrea works, the Flourishing Foundation, as well as Prabhjit's. And look at the education opportunities, look at the opportunities for community learning, and look at the safe spaces, as Linda Jean said, that they create for these kinds of uncomfortable conversations. So they are two places and spaces that you could go to learn. And there might be organizations similar to that in your own backyard. So explore what's in your own community, right? And in your own backyard as well. David, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you'd be okay, and ask the question that you've typed in the chat, because we're just a small group. So you go ahead and ask the ladies, and we'll let them put their hand up in the order that they want to respond.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So I'm in the Rotary E-Club of World Peace in District 5330, the virtual club. And I'm part of the DEI committee in our district. And the question is how, because there's the status quo of many people, and many particularly in Rotary, that this has not been an issue or that's been addressed, or it is a resistance to even look at this because it's like, we're fine, we're doing okay. And how to really open this is without a knock on the head, or blaming, coming in blaming, how to have the invitation to open to the conversation so people can be more open and accepting, or this is a function of time, over time. So just interested.
Wonderful, David. I'm going to let Linda Jean start if she'd
Oh.
be so kind, and then I'm going to pull Andrea and Pedro into the conversation as well.
Yes, since you asked about how do you do this for Rotary, that's part of what I have been doing. And as the chair of the DEI working group in my district, what I did was I went, first of all, they're Rotarians. And they are not perfect. One of the issues I have with the four-way test is the first thing is it the truth? And my immediate question is, whose truth? Because we all have different truths and we need to recognize that. The rest of it is okay. All right. But I have gone around to various clubs to introduce and explain Rotary's commitment to DEI. And so it's coming in there in terms of this, you're a Rotarian, you're in Rotary, you need to know what the values are of the organization which you're a member. I don't say it, and if you don't like it, you can leave, but I don't say that. It's in the back of my head, So that has been received very positively as a matter of fact, because we're presenting information. We have had, and we've had to deal with issues where there was great discord within the memberships of the Rotary members, some who have left their clubs when these discussions got started, and the entrenched racist biases, some of the people that they had been quote unquote friends with for years came out. And that's really difficult. But we talked about be uncomfortable. It's been uncomfortable for some, but for others, it will be an opportunity to reflect. And for others, it will be an opportunity to do something as well, to stand with, if nothing else. There's no one right way. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic answer. This is difficult. This is reality. And we just need to keep treading through it. I don't know if that's helpful at all. But I would like to be in touch with you. Then you can get in touch with me. I don't know if you can, I don't know what we should do. Put my email in the chat.
If you put your email in the chat, Linda,
I'll put my
David
email in the chat. And with you being an e-club, that would be great because we can we can meet virtually. And I can actually show you some of the Unlearning Racism workshops that I have, which keep in mind when I did this work, because I used to do it almost full time. Now when I'm retired, so my job is I'm a full-time volunteer. But when I did this work, all of the participants had no choice but to be there. It was required in their job for them to come to my workshop. And it was really heartening to get the feedback from them because they had to do an evaluation. And I know that there were people in upper management that were looking for terrible evaluations so they could check me out, but it didn't. It came out great. People were really respectful, and they were really receptive. So it's just a matter to be able, how do I say, to get an opportunity to get in their ear, because the ear is very close to the brain. And then they start to think, and it's a safe space, and they have control. I don't go in and tell them, like, for instance, we went through the definitions. We explore that as a group and come up with what those definitions are and what they need and the impact, as opposed to me telling. So that's a short answer to a complicated question.
Great, thank you.
Linda Jean, did that answer your question, David? Was that sort of give you some
That's
idea?
helpful.
And I put Linda Jean's email in there as well. Reach out, look at what District 5050 is doing. They are leaders, right? What Linda Jean did with her DEI is being adopted by other districts. So take a look there. And if I can plug ours, take a look at District 5040. We partnered with Rotary Peace Scholars, and we're working with Mediators Beyond Borders to have facilitated peace conversations with Indigenous communities in our own backyard. So we're not assuming we know, we're going in and asking and having a very humble conversation. And as Andrea and Prajot reminded us, we're being in relation, right? It's building that relationship and building that peace. And I love, Linda Jean's reminder that it's about whose truth and whose knowledge counts. Andrea or Prajot, is there anything you'd like to add or give David some ideas from an outside perspective, like maybe reaching into the community? Go ahead, Andrea.
I just wanted to see if Prabjot wanted to go ahead. All right, thank you. The only
You
thing I
have
was
been
going to
quiet
add.
for a while. You go ahead then. I'll
Oh,
go.
it's all good. I don't need to talk. I like to listen. The only thing I think that I would add, there isn't anything to add. I know that Linda Jean is also keeping her answer short, so I expect this is the next. The only thing I was going to add is that when we're beginning any of these conversations, this idea of calling out somebody is atrocious.
Oh, yes.
And so if we
absolutely.
set the safe space that we're actually all in this, literally all in this together, and this is a constant learning for all of us. It's not about dreadful thinking, and some of us have now been cured of it. That's absurd, right? And so that's what we're understanding. And so I feel that I think Dr. Todd said this earlier, about the compassion where, we've been misguided, all of us. We were born into this, absolutely, a system that is unacceptable. But I just feel like that might be the starting place, is just this very compassionate knowledge that this is all of us. Okay. There isn't anybody who has, who's passed or graduated, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But and I think it's an important point that you make, that this is something that Rotary at large, this is important in Rotary at large, and part of the goal for moving forward and maturing everyone within Rotary.
Wonderfully put, David.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you.
Prabjot, is there anything that you'd like to add or to share? Thank you.
Yeah, just, this summit is called DEI Summit, diversity, equity, inclusion. And DEI documents most of the time, they really don't talk about racism and anti-racism. While there is sort of an understanding that it is embedded somewhere there, somewhat there, because, or somewhere there, because we are talking about equity, so that everybody has access, everybody's included, and there's diversity and so on. Nevertheless, I personally feel, and I'm sure after some years, my feeling will have transformed. Nevertheless, I feel that we need to continue to talk about race and racism. So I'm repeating myself, as I said earlier on. So David, I think what you have mentioned, that reaching out to people, having conversations, asking people who are comfortable or uncomfortable to talk about race, to come and have small sessions, like for an hour, get together and just have a conversation. Maybe somebody can give a 10-minute or 15-minute talk, and then just talk about race so that people can share. And I think sharing is so important. And absolutely, we don't have the luxury of being Oprah Winfrey, who got people from I don't know when they were in school, and that how they were horrible to each other or horrible to the African American students in their class, and now they regret, they're crying and blah blah blah. We don't have that luxury. I get students in my courses, they're with me for 3 to 3.5 months. Some I'll see 3, 4, 5 times because they'll take other courses with me. That tells me that I'm an all right person. I'm not bad, right? That I'm a good teacher. Let's say that it reinforces that. But I have, on the other hand, cases where it is shocking. And that how to handle, where someone yells and screams and in the class, it's unbelievable. And at the end of the semester brings a little cactus and writes, "Sorry for being a prick." And, I just take it in good humor, because I have great sense of humor. And plus, I always go with that I am the mature one. You know, if I begin to behave like my student, then what's the difference? So, but that's a sad thing also in a way. So that's something that when we are talking about race, or we ourselves are engaging with race, these are some of the things for which we also need a support network. So I consider this as a support network where I'm able to talk and share. So I think those are the opportunities that need to be there. Thanks.
Wonderful, Linda Jean.
Great,
Go right
thank you.
ahead and
Yeah.
share.
Yeah, I just want to also emphasize how addressing this openly and getting those conversations started and moving on can make a difference. When I first started with the contract, which was a 3-year contract with ICBC, there was no policy around, and they were looking at combating racism because that came out through some of the words that UN had put forward. Does everybody know the importance of March the 21st? Does anyone not know the importance of March the 21st? March the 21st, oh, you want to go ahead? Was the UN Nations Day for the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, all forms of racial discrimination. And this is in fact acknowledged and celebrated every year, and many other related declarations have come forward. So if you're looking for some resource material, go to the UN website and click on racism, and you'll be absolutely amazed at how much material is there that can in fact be useful. But that came in 1965, wasn't enacted to 1969, if I recall. And it still has not received 100% acceptance. It is the UN, but for all the nations, all the nations haven't, but they're very close. And every year there's more and more, because this, I think, social media is going on. Anyway, the other thing is, one of the things ICBC did was they created a combating racism policy, which meant that all their employees were responsible for. So that's a big change. And this is in fact something that organizations need to do. And employers need to recognize. So putting together appropriate policies that will assist. And they just went straight to combating racism and did workshops to help their employees how to deal with it, because it does happen, it is real. I'd also suggest you go to the city of Surrey. That's where I live. I was on the social policy committee for a few years, but anyway, go to their website, because the city of Surrey has received a number of awards for implementing what they call it is diversity and inclusion. And I live in Surrey, and I was absolutely astounded, because I know we have a lot of issues and we are a really multicultural community. But there, again, resource material, because another part of this summit was to give people information and resources that they can use to help in their work. So I just wanted to offer those, little bits of resource opportunities for you.
Appreciate it, Linda, very much. And we've between Prep Job and I, we've got them, David, in the chat for you. Are you raising your hand for a follow-up? If you are, you can unmute. Okay, you're just saying thank you. Appreciate that. Well, in the interest of time and to get us all back into the main thing, what I'm going to ask the ladies, unless we have, did the U.S. sign? Lori has a question. Does anybody know if the U.S. has signed on to the March 21st Declaration? Andrea, please let us know. Is that a
There's
yes?
a few that they've signed, but they are not ratified because they're not in full agreement as yet. One of also is the Child Protection Treaty. The U.S. is not ratified.
It has not ratified yet. So there's some internal processes that go through in order for some countries to ratify their agreement to those UN statements
But
that
at
are very
least they
important.
have to keep talking.
Yes, that's the best part, is in those working group, like Linda Jean says, until they get ratification, it creates that space for them to keep having these very important conversations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give each of these ladies about a minute and a half to provide us any final words that they'd like to share with you today. And then we're going to be zoomed into the main room. So Prabjot, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to Andrea and then to Linda Jean. So Prabjot, about a minute of some final words of wisdom or sharing with these lovely individuals.
Having only read about racism in novels, books, watched in films, I was exposed to it on 23rd August 1993 as I was immigrating from India to Canada at Frankfurt Airport when I took my boarding card at the counter with Lufthansa Airlines to come to Vancouver. I said thank you to the gentleman, and I turned and there was a white woman standing there who said, "You are not welcome." And she said it to my face. I was so taken aback. I didn't know what to do. First of all, I had not seen that many white people in one place ever in my life. I lived in Kashmir. I'd seen enough of foreigners, as we call, from Europe and elsewhere, come there for tourism, but it was a shock. And that I guess started my learning, and experiencing that sinking feeling, but then also finding support. So I would say that, as I said previously, that organizations such as WC Cars or individuals and organizations, I'm not remembering everyone, Rotary here, of course, Linda Jean, Andrea, Shirley Pat, and so many of you who are here, I want to raise my hands in gratitude. Raise my hands is coming from indigenous practices. I come from a culture where we clasp our hands. So I say that I learned, I'm sure as a little baby, I must have been told, shake hand, shake hand. So I learned shake hand. So I can also learn to raise my hands in gratitude to the Creator and to teachers, indigenous and others.
So Andrea, if you would provide us with a few closing words, please.
Thank you. I didn't really think this through, so I'll just try to gather them fairly quickly. I think I feel, or I think that what I would want to say would be that there are extraordinary opportunities everywhere we look. And the fear always in any kind of a small group, I think Prabjot even mentioned this, is preaching to the choir. It isn't actually about preaching, it is about invitation. And these are awkward and difficult conversations, but the truth is we all want to see positive change. And so I feel like that investment alone is just worth it. It's painful for people to come to understand that perhaps what we've been taught, or mostly what we've not been taught, has been so damaging, that we've been witnesses to and complicit in incredible suffering. And it's a very painful, coming to know that we have very long courses, giving people an awful lot of time and coming to deal with that personal grief over an image of a nation that is not true or that never existed, all of that personal. But I just want to encourage everyone, and I'm asking you then to encourage all of your people in your networks and larger world. There are tremendous programs available and workshops, and Linda Jean and Prabjot and all the work that's ongoing, Shirley Pat. And I just want to encourage everybody that it's more than worth it. And we're more than capable. We're co-creators in all of this. We're more than capable of changing all of this. And so I'm just really grateful. It's very exciting to be in a room with other like-minded and like-hearted folks. So thank you so much.
Andrea, very beautiful words. Linda Jean.
I feel that I've spoken enough, and I can only apologize for it being somewhat disjointed because of the trying to keep in within the time frame, which we seem to have done. There are little chunks that didn't come out, but I'm going to end with a personal story, which has convinced me that this is right. As an adult person and working in Canada and getting exposed to multiculturalism and all of these and diversity and all that kind of thing, I came to the realization that my mother was a staunch racist. She really was. I thought she was the best thing in life. When people ask me, because I'm highly educated, where did you learn the best and most? And I said, what I learned from my mother. And that is true. But I also came to realize that nobody is perfect. And I came to start examining myself in terms of some of the preconceived notions that I have had about certain groups that I just never questioned, never even thought to question. So I really do believe that we learn to be racist, or not necessarily to be labeled the full dress suit of racism, but have certain racist attitudes and certain racist beliefs that we have to basically be open to examining, and basically be open to remembering that we are not to blame for it. And we should not be ashamed of admitting it, which will help us learn more. And that we need to make certain that we give that same courtesy to others, that others are not necessarily to blame for those beliefs that they have, and they should not be shamed. We should, in fact, engage and try our best to continue to learn, to educate ourselves, and to be open to different perspectives. Different is not better or worse. It's simply different.
Linda Jean Shashani Glenn. I'd just like to personally thank Carl, Lori, David, Carol, Mira, and Linda. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being uncomfortable for the last 90 minutes. Thank you for thinking about continuing to be uncomfortable. You know, as Andrea told us, this is root work. This is about getting down into our roots. And as Linda Jean just shared, it's about unpacking all of our lived experience so that we can move together forward in a better way. So from me and from all the ladies, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Shirley Pat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.